Hello beauties, this is Leslie with Knits for You by Leslie Q. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, that way you don't miss any of my tutorials or tips for knitting and crochet. This is the start of day 2 for our Knitting for Beginners class. Today I am going to continue talking about abbreviations a little bit, and as well as we're going to learn to cast on, to do the knit stitch, purl stitch, binding off, weaving in our ends, creating a swatch, and we're going to talk a little bit about edging and blocking our work. I'm going to divide these up into 4 videos. So this will be video 5 that you're watching now. And in this video, we are strictly going to talk about abbreviations and casting on. So let's go ahead and get started. For these next 4 videos, this is all the supplies you're going to need. You're going to need, this is just my knitting needles, but I'm going to set that aside. You're going to need your yarn that we're going to be using for our pattern. And our pattern is still linked below. It's a free pattern by Wake Whimsy. It's the Pretty Knitted Coffee Sleeve. Okay, that's what that is. So you're going to have that printed out. I would also like you to print out your knitting cheat sheet abbreviations. This one is a little different than the one that is linked below. But if you go ahead and go over to the Pinterest group that I created for this class, which is also linked below, this sheet is in that group and you just need to find it. It is by don'tbesuchasquare.com. They did a really good job. This one is pretty intricate, but I highlighted the things on here that we need to focus on, and we'll talk about those in here in just a second. So for right now, let's set all of our items aside because we don't need them just yet. So I'm going to move everything outside of this, and we're going to talk about our knitting cheat sheet and abbreviations. Okay, so first of all, the most important ones are highlighted here, as you can see. I'm going to read through them if you can't read them very well from the video. The first one is BO, that is the term for, or the abbreviation for binding off or casting off. So when you're done with your project, that's how you finish it so all your stitches don't unravel and come apart. CO is our next one, that's cast on. So that's our beginning stitches. Your pattern will tell you at the beginning of the entire pattern how many stitches you need to cast on. Usually they'll tell you which method is best. There are a bunch of ways to cast on stitches. So we will talk about that in a few minutes when we learn to cast on. DEC stands for decrease. So we're decreasing stitches. Again, we don't have to worry about that for the pattern that we're going to be creating together, but these are good terms that you're going to need to know for future projects. DPN stands for double pointed needles. INC stands for increase. K stands for knit. KFB means to knit front and back loops. Again, these are going to be advanced things that, or they're not really super advanced, but you can look them up. After we get done talking about these, feel free to search out the ones that you're kind of confused about after reading the description. Because it looks intimidating, but once you actually see them live and on a video, they're not that intimidating. So we are knit 2 together, which is K2TOG, which means knitting 2 together. So that's a decrease in stitches. K-wise means knitwise. So when we're slipping stitches, which means we are not knitting them, we're just slipping them from one needle to the next. This is where they will tell you if you're going to slip them knitwise or purlwise. So K-wise means knitwise. Make one stitch is M1 or M1K, depending on who wrote the pattern. It means to make one stitch knitwise. MC, that is your main color. If you're doing stripes or pattern work, they're going to have different terms for your main color and your contrasting color and things like that. So MC is your main color. P stands for purl. So our two main stitches in knitting are knit and purl. So P is purl, K is knit. Pretty simple. PFB means to purl in the front and back of a stitch. So that's a single purl increase, okay? PM stands for place your marker. So we talked about stitch markers the last time, and some patterns tell you to put a marker there because you're going to need to know that exact location for your project. P2 TOG, that is purl 2 stitches together. So that's a decrease on the purl side of your project. PSSO, now that stands for to pass your slip stitch over. Basically, that is something that we are not going to really talk about, but again, you can search that out. It's not as intimidating as it sounds. P-wise, P-W-I-S-E means purl-wise. So again, when we're slipping stitches, that would be to slip it purl-wise. And we'll talk about knits and purls in a little bit. R-E-P is repeat. R-N-D is round. R-S is right side. So your work has a right side and a wrong side, and we will talk about that in a little bit as well. SL is slip. We talked about slipping stitches. Basically, that's moving it from one needle to the next without working it. For that would be something in a little bit more advanced stitches or in more advanced projects that you will continue to work on later on. SL1K is to slip one knitwise. We just talked about that. And then SL1P is slip one purlwise. We talked about that too. SLST is slip stitch. SSK means to slip, slit, and then knit the two together knitwise. So that would be something that you could totally look up as well. And then the same thing, slip, slip, purlwise. So we're going to be talking about, that would be talking about slipping 2 stitches knitwise and then purling them together. ST, that's a big one. That stands for stitch. Stockinette stitch is ST. So if you see that together, it looks kind of confusing, but ST is stockinette stitch. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. TBL is through the back loop. TFL is through the front loop. TOG is together. WS is for wrong side. WYIB is with yarn in back. And WYIF is with yarn in front. So as we're kind of going through learning knits and purls, I'm going to be talking about where to put the yarn and everything. So that'll kind of make a little bit more sense here in a few minutes. YO is yarn over. So that kind of creates a hole in the stitch, sometimes for like buttonholes and things like that, or other types of projects. 1 asterisk is repeating the instructions as follows, or as directed. And then if you've got 2, so if you got 1 on each end, you're going to repeat the instructions in between those 2 asterisks however many times it tells you to do so. So it's just a way of reading the pattern. Okay, so that's the big ones. For our pattern, really all you need to know is K, knit, P, purl, CO, cast on, BO, bind off, and that's really it, okay? ST is stitch. That's all we're going to need for this simple project. But these are good things for you to start doing some research on and start watching videos on, because if you start moving on and advancing, those are things you are really going to want to learn how to do. And you can maybe print out a pattern that you aspire to do next after this project and start looking up the abbreviations, writing them down, maybe highlight them for yourself, and, you know, look up YouTube videos on how to do them or instructions online. Okay, so we're going to set this aside, and we are going to work on casting on, okay? So you're going to need your skein of yarn and your needles. Now again, our pattern calls for number 8, which is 5 millimeters. So we've got our needles, and then we've got our worsted weight number 4 yarn. Okay, so when you're beginning a skein, now this one I've used a little bit, that's why the paper is getting a little loose around the edges here, but there's an end up here somewhere underneath this packaging, and then there's usually an end. You kind of have to dig around for it sometimes, but it's at the end and in the middle of the skein, and that's where you want to pull from, okay? If you go from up here, then you're constantly unwinding and it's a big pain in the butt. So you just want to find where the yarn starts in the middle of the skein. So first off, we're going to look at our pattern, and we're going to talk about gauge a little bit. So to cast on, this is our pattern. Okay, we know what we need. Now ours says to cast on, let's turn this over so it's easier to see. It says to cast on 16 stitches. Okay, so your pattern will tell you how many you need to cast on. So what we're going to do is we're going to cast on 16 stitches. I like to use the long tail cast on method. That's the most common. There's a ton of different ways to cast on stitches, and feel free to search those out. But for this video, we're just going to stick with the long tail cast on. There is a thing called a provisional cast on method. That is when you are going to attach something else to that end. So it's a temporary cast on. This is a permanent cast on, okay? So we are going to do this for our project. So in order to determine how long your string needs to be, we're going to wrap it around the needle, and that's going to count for each stitch. So I start at the bottom, and I just pinch it with my thumb. And if it says to cast on 16 stitches, which it does, we're going to wrap the yarn around the needle 16 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. Okay, so that gives us a pretty good idea of how much yarn we're going to need to do our long tail cast on. Okay, what I like to do after I do that, give it an extra inch or 2, because you know what, you can always snip it off at the end. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is create a slip knot. So here's how I do a slip knot. I twist the yarn. Here's my working yarn. Here's my tail. Okay, the short end is the tail, and this is my working yarn. So I hold it in between my 2 fingers, and I twist it around, okay, and I put my fingers in like this, okay? So your tail is over the top of the working yarn. And then what I do is I grab the working yarn and just pull it through, okay? So there we have this loop right here. Now we're going to take our knitting needle, and we're gonna go in from the right side, and here I kind of just hold that there with my pointer, and I pull this tight, okay? And I'm just bringing it, now I'm not squeezing the life out of it. I just get it nice and snug, okay, to where it'll slide, but it's not loose, and you don't see a huge gap down there. Now the thing you wanna make sure is that your tail end of the yarn, which is the end that stops, is in the front, and your working yarn is in the back, okay? I keep my yarn to the left because there are 2 different ways to knit. I use the English method, and some people use the continental method, and that is just a different way of holding the yarn. So I'd really like you to look that up. And again, I saved some information in the Pinterest group that I created about English style and continental style. So I knit English style, and that's how I'm going to teach you, okay? But this is just for casting on purposes, and this is the long tail cast on method. So we are going to take our 2 bottom fingers, our pointer and our thumb go in the middle, and they're gonna spread open like this. Now what we do is I hold on to the yarn here so it doesn't slip around, and I bring this down, okay? Now here's where it gets fun. And I know this looks confusing, but it gets super, super fun. So you go underneath this first loop, around this loop, and through the middle, okay? And that is our second stitch. Okay, so we're gonna try that again. So remember, we're holding on here. Now I'm not squeezing this down here, okay? I'm just gently holding it. The yarn can still slide through my fingers, but it's just guiding it. Okay, so put your pointer and thumb through that hole right there. You're gonna hold on to your stitches up here, bring the needle down, okay? So you have this somewhat kind of like a V. Now you're gonna go through this loop, up and over this loop, and then through the middle, okay? And then kind of gently, I just kind of like wiggle it back and forth, and all that does is tighten it a little bit, okay? We're gonna do that again. That's 3. So we're going to put our pointer and thumb in, under, over, and through. Okay, that's 4. Bring it down, under, over, and through. That's 5. Okay. So, how many do we need? We need 16. So we're at 5. Okay, same thing. Pinch down here gently, bring it down, under, around, and through. Okay, we're at 6. Under, around, and through. So now, and if you like, oh, I lost count, no, you can pretend this is a lot. You just count 2, 4, 6, we're at 7, okay? So again, make sure your tail yarn is in front, your working yarn is in the back, okay? So we bring it down, under, around, and through. 8, under, around, through. 9, under, around, through. 10. And we got 6 more. Under, around, through. Under, around, and through. Okay, let's count them. First off, kind of look, okay? You don't want your stitches so tight that they can't move on your needle, okay? That's a big thing. And you also want them to be similar to each other, okay? You don't want this one to be loose and this one to be tight and this one to be loose. You want them to pretty much look very similar and symmetrical, okay? So let's count them. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, so we've got 4 more. Tail in the front, working in the back, under, around, and through. Under, around, and through. Under, around, and through. Okay. How many do we have? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. Last one. Okay. So, under, around, and through. All right, we are at 16. You have just cast it on. 16 stitches. This is where you begin. That is it, guys, okay? So I want you to make sure that your stitches are not too tight and that they are casted on evenly. And just keep doing this until you get them to the desired symmetry you'd like, okay? So we are going to move on, and I am going to talk to you about the knit stitch in our next video.